The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Buckingham Palace as Sergeant James Morrison adjusted his red tunic one final time. For 15 years, he had stood motionless at his post, a living statue in the eyes of countless tourists who snapped photos and tried desperately to make him crack a smile. What they never knew was the weight he carried beneath that iconic bearskin hat, not just the physical burden of the ceremonial uniform, but the emotional load of being separated from his family for months at a time. James had joined the Queen's Guard when his daughter Sarah was only 3 years old. Now 18, she was preparing for university, and he realized with a sharp pang that he had missed most of her childhood, standing perfectly still while life moved around him. The irony wasn't lost on him that while he protected the royal family, his own family had grown up largely without him. On this particular Tuesday morning, something felt different. The palace was buzzing with unusual energy, and whispers among the staff suggested that a documentary crew had been granted unprecedented access to film the guards during their off-duty hours. James had initially refused to participate, like most of his colleagues. The idea of cameras following them around, exposing the human side behind their stoic facades, felt like a violation of everything they stood for. But then came the phone call that changed everything. Sarah's voice crackled through his mobile phone during his lunch break, tears evident even through the static connection. She had been accepted to Oxford University but wasn't sure she wanted to go. "Dad, I feel like I don't even know you," she had whispered. "You're always this perfect soldier, but I just want to know who my father really is." That evening, James found himself knocking on the documentary producer's hotel room door. Maria Santos, a kind-faced woman in her 40s, welcomed him with surprised delight. She had been hoping to convince at least one guard to open up about their personal lives, understanding that behind every uniform was a real person with real struggles. "I want people to understand that we're not just tourist attractions," James told her, his usually steady voice wavering slightly. "We're fathers, sons, brothers. We have families who sacrifice just as much as we do." Maria nodded, sensing the depth of emotion behind his carefully measured words. The next morning brought an unexpected twist. As James took his position outside the palace gates, he noticed a small girl, perhaps 5 years old, tugging at her mother's coat. The child had been staring at him with wide, curious eyes, and suddenly she broke free from her mother's grasp and ran directly toward him. "Excuse me, Mr. Soldier," she said in a tiny voice, looking up at his towering figure. "My daddy is a soldier too, but he's far away. Do you miss your family when you stand here all day?" The question hit James like a physical blow. For a moment, his composure nearly cracked. The documentary cameras, which had been positioned discreetly around the area, captured the subtle shift in his expression, barely perceptible to most, but unmistakably human to those who knew what to look for. The little girl's mother rushed over, apologizing profusely for her daughter's behavior, but James found himself wanting to respond, to connect with this child who somehow understood what adults missed. Instead, he maintained his position, but something had shifted inside him. The seed of change had been planted. That evening, James made a decision that would surprise everyone, including himself. He called Sarah and asked her to visit him at the palace the following weekend. "I want you to see what I do," he said. "But more importantly, I want you to understand why I do it, and what it means for our family." As he hung up the phone, James realized that for the first time in his career, he was ready to let the world see beyond the uniform. The documentary would capture not just the pageantry and tradition, but the very real human cost of dedication to duty. What none of them expected was how profoundly it would change not just public perception, but the guards themselves. The stage was set for revelations that would touch hearts around the world and remind everyone that behind every symbol of strength stands a person with their own vulnerabilities, hopes, and deep capacity for love. The weekend brought unexpected warmth to London, and with it came Sarah Morrison, clutching a small bouquet of daffodils she had picked from their family garden. At 18, she possessed her father's strong jawline, but her mother's gentle eyes, and as she approached Buckingham Palace, her heart raced with nervous anticipation. James had arranged for his daughter to observe the changing of the guard ceremony from a special vantage point. But what he hadn't told her was that several of his fellow guardsmen had also invited their families. Word had spread quietly through the ranks that something special was happening, and one by one the stoic soldiers were finding courage to bridge the gap between their public duty and private lives. Corporal David Chen stood at attention near the palace gates, but his eyes kept darting toward a small section of the crowd where his elderly mother sat in a wheelchair. Mrs. Chen had traveled from Birmingham, her first visit to London in 20 years. At 78, she had never seen her son in his full ceremonial uniform, and the pride radiating from her weathered face was visible even from a distance. David had joined the Guards after a difficult period following his father's death. His mother had supported his decision, but the physical demands of his training and the long periods away from home had taken their toll on their relationship. She had grown frail in recent years, and David carried the constant worry that he might not be there when she needed him most. As the ceremony began, something magical happened. The documentary cameras captured not just the precise movements of the guards, but the faces of their loved ones watching from the crowd. Sarah Morrison gasped audibly when she spotted her father among the sea of red tunics and bearskin hats. For the first time, she truly understood the weight of responsibility he carried and the pride that came with it. But it was Private Tommy Williams who provided the day's most unexpected moment. At just 22, Tommy was the youngest member of the unit, and his girlfriend Emma had been struggling with his absence during his training. She had threatened to end their relationship just days earlier, unable to cope with the uncertainty of military life. Emma stood nervously at the edge of the crowd, unsure why Tommy had insisted she come. She had almost canceled several times, but something in his voice during their last phone conversation had convinced her to make the journey from Manchester. As the guards executed their flawless routine, Tommy did something that broke every rule in the book. During a brief moment when the formation shifted, he caught Emma's eye and, with the slightest movement of his head, acknowledged her presence. It was a gesture so subtle that most observers missed it entirely, but Emma saw it clearly. In that instant, she understood that beneath the rigid discipline and unwavering duty, Tommy was still the young man who had promised to love her forever. The ceremony concluded with its usual precision, but the aftermath was anything but typical. Instead of immediately returning to their quarters, several guards lingered in designated areas where they could briefly interact with their families. The documentary crew followed at a respectful distance, capturing moments of genuine emotion that the public had never witnessed. James Morrison approached his daughter with uncertain steps, still in full uniform, but somehow looking more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. "What did you think?" he asked, his voice barely audible above the murmur of the dispersing crowd. Sarah looked at her father for a long moment before wrapping him in a fierce embrace, bearskin hat and all. "I think I finally understand why Mum always said she was proud of you," she whispered. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." Nearby, David Chen wheeled his mother closer to where he stood, and for the first time in years, she reached up to touch his face. "My brave son," she said in broken English, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I always knew you were special, but seeing you like this, your father would be so proud." Tommy Williams found Emma waiting for him by the palace gates, her eyes red from crying. "I'm sorry," she began, but he gently placed a gloved finger to her lips. "I know this isn't easy," he said quietly, "but seeing you here today, knowing you're willing to try to understand, it means everything to me." As the families began to disperse, each carrying with them a new understanding of the sacrifice and dedication required for their loved one's service, the guards themselves felt something shift. The wall between their public and private selves had begun to crack, not in a way that diminished their professionalism, but in a way that made them more complete human beings. The documentary producer, Maria Santos, watched the interactions with tears in her own eyes. She had hoped to capture the human side of these iconic figures, but what she was witnessing went far beyond her expectations. These weren't just soldiers performing their duties. They were sons, fathers, and partners learning to reconcile their devotion to duty with their deep love for family. 3 weeks after the emotional family gathering at Buckingham Palace, the ripple effects of that day continued to spread through the ranks of the Queen's Guard. What had started as a simple documentary project was becoming something much more profound, a transformation in how these dedicated soldiers viewed the balance between duty and personal connection. Sergeant James Morrison found himself in an unexpected position as unofficial counselor to his younger colleagues. His willingness to open up about his own struggles with fatherhood had inspired others to seek his advice. On this particular Tuesday evening, he sat in the modest break room of their barracks with Private Tommy Williams, who was wrestling with a decision that could change his life forever. "She said yes, Sarge," Tommy announced, his voice a mixture of excitement and terror. "Emma agreed to marry me, but she wants to know if I'm planning to make this a career or just finish my service." Commitment. James studied the young man's face, seeing his own doubts from years past reflected there. "What do you want, Tommy? Not what your father wants, not what Emma wants. What do you want?" Tommy stared at his hands, still bearing the calluses from hours of weapon maintenance and drill practice. "I love this job, I really do. The pride, the tradition, the sense of purpose. But I also love her, and I can see what it's doing to her. She tries to be supportive, but I catch her crying sometimes when she thinks I'm not looking." Before James could respond, Corporal David Chen appeared in the doorway, his usually composed expression clouded with worry. "Sarge, I need to talk to you. It's about my mother." The three men sat together in the fluorescent-lit room, surrounded by the institutional beige walls that had witnessed countless similar conversations over the decades. David explained that his mother's health had taken a sudden turn for the worse. The doctors in Birmingham were recommending immediate surgery, but the procedure carried significant risks given her age and frail condition. "I've requested emergency leave," David said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "But there's a state visit next week and they need all hands on deck. I don't know what to do." James felt the familiar weight of impossible choices that seemed to define military life. How many times had he faced similar dilemmas? How many birthdays, school plays, and family dinners had he missed because duty called? The documentary crew, led by Maria Santos, had been following these personal stories. With growing fascination, they had expected to capture the pageantry and discipline of the Queen's Guard, but instead were documenting something much more universal: the eternal struggle between professional obligation and personal love. Maria approached the barracks, Commander Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, with a proposal that surprised even her. "What if we could find a way to help?" she suggested during their weekly meeting. "The public response to the preview clips has been overwhelming. People are connecting with these stories in ways we never expected." Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, a career soldier nearing retirement, had initially been skeptical of the documentary project, but even he couldn't deny the positive changes he was seeing in his men. They seemed more motivated, more connected to their purpose, and paradoxically, more effective in their duties. "What did you have in mind?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. Maria pulled out her tablet and showed him the hundreds of messages that had poured in from viewers around the world. "People want to help. There are offers to cover travel expenses for families, volunteers willing to visit elderly relatives, even job opportunities for spouses. The public is seeing these guards as real people for the first time, and they want to give back." Meanwhile, back in the break room, an unexpected conversation was taking place. Tommy Williams was sharing advice with a man nearly twice his age, drawing on the wisdom of watching his girlfriend struggle with military life. "Have you told your mother how proud you are of her?" Tommy asked David. "I mean, really told her? Emma made me realize that sometimes we're so focused on being strong and reliable that we forget to show our vulnerability. Maybe your mom needs to know that you're scared too." David blinked in surprise. In Chinese culture, expressing such raw emotion to one's parents was not common, especially for sons, but something about Tommy's earnest question struck him deeply. We don't really talk like that in my family," David admitted. "Maybe it's time to start," James interjected gently. "I spent 15 years trying to be the perfect soldier for my daughter, but what she really needed was just to know her father, the human being behind the uniform. That evening, David Chen made a phone call that would change his relationship with his mother forever. Speaking in Mandarin, he told her not just about the surgery and his fears for her health, but about how much he loved her, how proud he was to be her son, and how sorry he was for all the years he had kept his emotions locked away. Mrs. Chen, lying in her hospital bed in Birmingham, wept openly as she listened to her son's words. "My darling boy," she whispered back in English, a language she usually avoided. "I have been so proud of you every single day, not because you are a soldier, but because you are my son with a kind heart." The conversation lasted over an hour, bridging not just the miles between London and Birmingham, but decades of cultural barriers and unexpressed love. When David finally hung up the phone, his fellow guards gathered around him offering support without words. The documentary cameras captured none of this private moment, but they didn't need to. The transformation was visible in David's posture, in the way he carried himself during the next day's duty, and in the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you are deeply loved. The morning of Mrs. Chen's surgery arrived with an unseasonable chill that seemed to mirror the anxiety weighing on David's heart. He had been granted compassionate leave at the last minute, thanks to an unexpected intervention from Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, who had quietly rearranged the duty roster to ensure David could be with his mother. As David rushed through the corridors of Birmingham General Hospital, still in his civilian clothes that felt strange after months of military uniform, he was unaware that his story had captured the attention of people far beyond the confines of Buckingham Palace. The documentary footage of the guards' family struggles had been shared online, and something remarkable was happening across Britain. In a small cafe near the hospital, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson had been following David's story through social media updates shared by the documentary team. She had lost her own son in military service 20 years earlier, and something about David's devotion to his mother reminded her of her own boy. Without telling anyone, she had driven 3 hours from her home in Wales to Birmingham, carrying a thermos of homemade soup and a worn photograph of her son in uniform. Mrs. Patterson wasn't alone. In the hospital waiting room, David discovered an extraordinary gathering of strangers who had come simply to offer support. There was a young couple who had driven from Manchester because the husband had also served in the Guards, a group of elderly Chinese immigrants from the local community who wanted to show solidarity, and even a nurse who had requested to be assigned to Mrs. Chen's case after hearing about their story. David felt overwhelmed by this unexpected kindness from people he had never met. "I don't understand," he whispered to Maria Santos, who had arrived to document this spontaneous outpouring of support. "Why would all these people come here for us?" "Because you've reminded them that behind every uniform is a family," Maria replied softly. "You've made the Royal Guards human again, and people respond to humanity." Meanwhile, back at Buckingham Palace, the remaining guards were experiencing their own revelations. Tommy Williams had made a decision about his future with Emma, but it wasn't the one anyone expected. Instead of choosing between his military career and his relationship, he had found a third option. Emma had arrived in London the previous evening, with news of her own. She had been offered a position at a London hospital as a pediatric nurse, a job that would allow her to be closer to Tommy while pursuing her own career goals. Their conversation in a small pub near the palace had been one of the most honest of their relationship. "I was so focused on what I might be losing that I forgot to look at what we could be gaining," Emma admitted, reaching across the table to take Tommy's hand. "Watching you in that ceremony, seeing how much this means to you, I realized I don't want you to give up something you love. I want to be part of it." Tommy's eyes filled with tears, something that would have embarrassed him just weeks earlier but now felt natural and right. "Are you sure? Military life isn't easy for families. There will be deployments, long hours, times when duty has to come first." Emma smiled, the same bright smile that had first caught his attention at a university party 2 years earlier. "I'm not asking for easy, Tommy. I'm asking for real. And this is real." Their engagement announcement spread quickly through the Guards network, bringing congratulations and advice from unexpected quarters. Sergeant Morrison shared stories of his own marriage, offering practical wisdom about maintaining relationships during military service. Even some of the senior officers, normally distant figures in the Guard's daily lives, stopped by to offer their congratulations and support. Back in Birmingham, Mrs. Chen was wheeled into surgery with her son holding her hand until the last possible moment. The waiting began then, stretching through hours filled with nervous pacing and the quiet support of the strangers who had become friends. Mrs. Patterson sat beside David, sharing stories of her own son and offering the kind of comfort that only comes from someone who truly understands loss and love. "Your mother raised a good man," she told David during one of the longest hours of waiting. "That's the greatest legacy any parent can have." When the surgeon finally emerged with news that the operation had been successful, the waiting room erupted in quiet celebration. David's relief was so profound that he broke down completely, sobbing in the arms of people he had met just hours before. The documentary cameras captured this moment of raw human emotion, but more importantly, they captured the community that had formed around one family's crisis. As Mrs. Chen recovered in her hospital bed that evening, still groggy from anesthesia, but smiling weakly at her son, she managed to whisper something that would stay with David forever. "I always knew you were special, but now I see the world knows it too. You've brought all these kind people together just by being yourself." David looked around the room at the faces of the strangers who had become family for a day, at Maria, Santos and her camera crew who had treated their story with such dignity, and at the flowers and cards that continued to arrive from people across the country who had been touched by their experience. He realized that something fundamental had changed, not just for him but for all the Guards involved in the documentary. They had started this journey as isolated figures, magnificent in their solitude and dedication. But they were ending it as connected human beings, part of a larger community that valued both their service and their humanity. The rigid boundaries between public duty and private life hadn't disappeared, but they had become more permeable, allowing for the flow of emotion and connection that makes us truly human. 6 months after the documentary began filming, the lives of the Queen's Guard had transformed in ways none of them could have predicted. The final phase of the project was set to capture the Guards during the most challenging period of their year, the intense preparation for the Queen's official birthday celebration, a ceremony that demanded absolute perfection in front of millions of television viewers worldwide. James Morrison stood before his bathroom mirror at 4:30 a.m., adjusting his uniform with the same meticulous care he had practiced for 15 years. But this morning felt different. On his dresser sat a handwritten letter from his daughter Sarah, now thriving in her second semester at Oxford University. The letter wasn't just full of academic achievements and social activities. It was filled with genuine interest in his work and expressions of love that had been missing from their relationship for years. "Dad," she had written, "watching the documentary footage of you and your colleagues has made me realize something important. You weren't absent from my childhood because you didn't care. You were present in a different way, representing values of duty, honor, and service that I'm only now beginning to understand. I'm proud to be your daughter, and I want to share that pride with the world." Sarah's letter had arrived with unexpected news. She had written an essay about her father's service that had been accepted for publication in a national magazine. The piece, titled "My Father, the Queen's Guard," was due to be published the same week as the documentary's premiere. Meanwhile, David Chen was experiencing his own form of transformation. His mother's successful surgery and recovery had been just the beginning of their renewed relationship. Mrs. Chen had moved to London to be closer to her son, settling into a small flat near the barracks with the help of donations from viewers who had been following their story. But the most surprising development came when Mrs. Chen announced her intention to volunteer with other military families struggling with separation and communication issues. Despite her limited English and advanced age, she had connected with a local support group for military spouses and parents, offering her wisdom and experience to younger families facing similar challenges. "I spent too many years being afraid to show my feelings," she told David during one of their weekly dinners together. "Now I want to help other families learn from my mistakes." Tommy Williams and Emma had taken their relationship to new depths of understanding and commitment, Emma, had successfully transitioned to her new position at the London hospital, and their wedding was planned for the following spring. But more importantly, they had become advocates for military couples, speaking at events and sharing their experience of finding balance between service and love. Emma had discovered an unexpected passion for supporting military families, using her medical background to help establish better mental health resources for soldiers and their loved ones. "I used to see Tommy's service as something that separated us," she explained to a group of young military wives. "Now I see it as something that brought us together with a whole community of people who understand what sacrifice really means." The documentary team had captured all of these developments, but they were unprepared for what happened during the final week of filming. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, the barracks commander who had initially been skeptical of the project, requested a private meeting with Maria Santos. "I need to tell you something that's not going into your documentary," he said, settling into his office chair with an expression of barely contained emotion. "These men, James, David, Tommy, and all the others who participated in your project, they've become better soldiers, not worse ones. I was worried that exposing their personal lives would somehow diminish their effectiveness, but the opposite has happened." He pulled out a folder containing performance evaluations and incident reports. "Disciplinary issues are down 60% in the units that participated in your filming. Morale is at an all-time high. Retention rates have improved dramatically. Most importantly, these guards are connecting with the public in ways I've never seen before." Harrison paused, looking out his window toward the palace grounds where guards were conducting their morning drill. "You've given them permission to be human while still being exceptional soldiers. I didn't think that was possible." The final scenes of the documentary were filmed during the Queen's birthday celebration, a ceremony that draws thousands of spectators and represents the pinnacle of the Guard's ceremonial duties. As the cameras followed the preparation process, they captured moments of quiet confidence and mutual support that spoke to the bonds formed during the filming process. James Morrison, now wearing the additional stripes of a newly promoted warrant officer, stood with his unit as they prepared for their role in the ceremony. His promotion had been partly based on his leadership during the documentary project, particularly his mentoring of younger guards struggling with personal issues. David Chen had requested and received permission for his mother to watch the ceremony from a special viewing area reserved for military families. As he took his position in the formation, he could see her small figure in the crowd, wearing a bright red coat and waving a small Union Jack flag with enthusiasm that drew smiles from nearby spectators. Tommy Williams marched with the confidence of a young man who had found his place in the world. Emma watched from the crowd, wearing the engagement ring he had given her and holding a sign that simply read, "Proud of my guardian." As the ceremony reached its climax, with thousands of guards moving in perfect synchronization across the parade ground, the documentary cameras captured something remarkable. These weren't just soldiers performing their duties. They were human beings who had learned to embrace both their public responsibilities and their private loves without compromising either. The final shot of the documentary showed the three main guards, James, David, and Tommy, standing at attention as the Queen's carriage passed before them. Their faces showed the same disciplined composure that had defined the Queen's Guard for centuries. But there was something new there as well, a deep contentment that comes from knowing you are seen, understood, and loved for exactly who you are. 1 year after the documentary Behind the Guard Hearts Beneath the Helmets premiered on national television, the ripple effects continued to spread far beyond what anyone had imagined possible. The program had won 3 international awards and had been translated into 12 languages. But more importantly, it had fundamentally changed how the public viewed the men and women who served as the Queen's Guard. James Morrison sat in a television studio in Manchester, adjusting his civilian clothes nervously as he prepared for his 4th media interview of the month. The documentary had made him something of a celebrity, but more meaningful to him were the hundreds of letters he received from military families around the world, thanking him for showing that strength and vulnerability could coexist. His daughter, Sarah, sat in the studio audience, now a confident second-year university student who had changed her major to journalism after being inspired by the power of storytelling to create positive change. She was working on her own project documenting the experiences of military children, turning her personal struggle into a platform for helping others. The most surprising thing, James told the television host, wasn't how the public reacted to seeing us as human beings. It was how we reacted to seeing ourselves that way. For years, we thought we had to choose between being good soldiers and being good fathers, sons, or partners. The documentary taught us that we could be both. Across London, David Chen was experiencing his own moment of recognition. He had been selected to represent the Queen's Guard at an international military families conference in Geneva, where he would speak about the importance of cultural sensitivity and emotional openness in military communities. Mrs. Chen, now settled comfortably in her London flat and serving as an unofficial grandmother figure to several young military families, had become something of a local celebrity herself. Her story of reconnecting with her son had inspired a support group for elderly parents of service members which met weekly in the community center near the barracks. "My son taught me that love is not always quiet and patient," she told a room full of military parents during one of these meetings, speaking in the confident English she had been learning. Sometimes love must be brave and loud and willing to break old rules. The most dramatic transformation belonged to Tommy Williams and Emma, whose spring wedding had become a symbol of hope for military couples everywhere. Their ceremony had been attended by hundreds of people they had never met, viewers of the documentary who wanted to celebrate their love story in person, but their real achievement went beyond their personal happiness. Emma had successfully lobbied for the creation of a new support program for military spouses, providing career counseling and job placement services that helped partners of service members find meaningful work near their bases. Tommy had been promoted to corporal and was training as a mentor for new recruits, helping them navigate the challenges of balancing military service with personal relationships. "The documentary showed us that our stories matter," Emma explained to a group of newly married military couples. "We used to think we had to suffer in silence, that struggling with separation and uncertainty was just part of the deal. Now we know that talking about these challenges doesn't make us weak, it makes us stronger." The changes weren't limited to the three main families featured in the documentary. Throughout the Queen's Guard, a new culture had emerged that valued emotional intelligence alongside military precision. Commanding officers reported improved performance, better retention rates, and a significant decrease in the mental health issues that had previously plagued military communities. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, now nearing retirement, reflected on the transformation with a sense of amazement. "In 30 years of military service, I've never seen anything like it," he told Maria Santos during their final interview. "These guards haven't become less disciplined or less effective. They've become more human, and that has made them better soldiers." The documentary's success had also led to practical changes in military policy. The Ministry of Defense had implemented new family support programs, expanded mental health resources, and created more opportunities for military families to stay connected during periods of separation. Maria Santos, whose career had been transformed by the unexpected depth and impact of the project, was now working on a follow-up documentary exploring how other military units around the world were adopting similar approaches to supporting their personnel. "We set out to make a simple documentary about the Queen's Guard," she reflected. "What we ended up creating was a blueprint for how military organizations can honor both their traditions and their humanity." The final scene of this remarkable year played out on a quiet Tuesday morning at Buckingham Palace. James Morrison, David Chen, and Tommy Williams stood at their posts, maintaining the same unwavering vigilance that had defined the Queen's Guard for centuries. Tourists still gathered to take photographs and marvel at their discipline and dedication, but now something was different in the way people looked at them. Children no longer saw silent statues, but brave men and women with families and feelings. Adults recognized the sacrifice not just of the guards themselves, but of the families who supported them. The uniform remained a symbol of tradition and duty, but it had become something more. A reminder that true strength comes from the courage to be both professionally excellent and genuinely human. As the morning shift ended and the guards prepared to return to their quarters, they carried with them the knowledge that they had changed not just their own lives, but the lives of countless others who had been inspired by their willingness to show the world that heroes aren't perfect. They're human beings, choosing to serve something greater than themselves while still cherishing the love and relationships that make life meaningful. The documentary had ended, but the story it told continued to unfold in military communities around the world, proving that sometimes the most powerful way to serve others is simply to let them see who you really are.